My apartment was my sanctuary. It was on the 7th floor of a downtown high-rise, a little box in the sky that I'd saved for years to afford. The best part was the balcony. It was small, just a little concrete slab with a metal railing, but it was mine. It overlooked a sea of city lights, and it was my favorite place to decompress after a long day as a financial analyst. The height was the point. It was a buffer between me and the chaos of the world. Up there, I felt untouchable. That feeling, of course, didn't last. It started on a Tuesday night in late autumn. The air was getting crisp, and I was out on the balcony, nursing a cup of tea and watching the traffic snake below. That's when I heard it. A soft scrape. It was faint, but it was sharp, like metal on concrete. I froze, listening. It came again from my right. I peered over the railing, but there was nothing to see but the brick facade of the building and the balconies of my neighbors, all dark and empty. The building's design was staggered, so my balcony was slightly more recessed than the one to my right. I couldn't see its floor unless I leaned way out, which I wasn't about to do. I dismissed it. Wind. A piece of loose trim. The city is full of strange noises. I went back inside, locked the sliding glass door, and forgot about it. But the next night, it happened again. This time it was closer, more distinct. It wasn't just a scrape. It was a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded, and this is the only way I can describe it, like someone dragging a metal chair across a concrete floor. Except it wasn't coming from my neighbor's apartment through the wall. It was coming from their balcony, from outside. I got a knot in my stomach. I knew my neighbor, a quiet woman named Mrs. Gable who was in her 80s. She wasn't the type to be dragging furniture around on her balcony at 11 o'clock at night. I turned off my lights so I wouldn't be seen and crept to the glass door, peering out into the darkness. I could just make out the edge of her balcony railing. Nothing. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, my heart thudding against my ribs. I felt foolish, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I finally convinced myself it was my imagination playing tricks on me, and went to bed. I made sure the extra security bar was in the track of the sliding door. A week went by with nothing. I started to relax, telling myself I'd been overtired, stressed from work. I even chuckled about it. Then came the following Monday. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets and pattered against my windows. I was working late at my dining table, which faced the balcony. Around midnight, through the sound of the rain, I heard a different sound. A soft thump. It was against the glass of my balcony door. I froze, my blood turning to ice. My apartment was on the 7th floor. There was no fire escape on this side of the building. There was nothing but a sheer 70-foot drop to the pavement below. The only way onto my balcony was through my apartment. Thump. It was gentle, almost polite, like someone knocking with a single knuckle. My mind refused to accept it. It couldn't be happening. It had to be a branch, but there were no trees tall enough. Hail. No. It was just rain. My mind raced through a Rolodex of rational explanations and came up blank every single time. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just stared at the door, at the vertical blinds that were thankfully closed, obscuring the view. The knocking stopped. A minute passed. 2, 5. My entire body was coiled like a spring. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I think someone is on my 7th floor balcony. They'd think I was crazy or high. Then I heard a new sound. It was a low, guttural humming. A man's voice. He was humming a tune I didn't recognize, a discordant, wandering melody. And it was right on the other side of the glass. I could feel the vibration through the floor. That's when I lost it. I didn't scream. I was too scared to make a sound. I crab-walked backward, away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock it. I crawled into my bedroom, locked the door, and slid into the closet, pulling clothes down on top of me. I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering in my ears, and dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, my voice trembling. I told her everything. She was calm, professional, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice, the same skepticism I'd felt myself. "Sir, are you sure you're on the 7th floor?" "Yes," I hissed. "Please, you have to believe me." She promised to send a patrol car to check the area. It felt like an eternity in that closet. The humming had stopped. I couldn't hear anything but the rain and my own frantic heartbeat. After what felt like hours, my phone rang. It was the police. They were downstairs. "Sir, we've checked the entire perimeter of the building. There's no one out here. No ladders, no ropes, no sign of anything unusual. Are you sure you're okay?" I felt a wave of nausea. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined all of it? I stammered a thank you and hung up. I stayed in that closet for another hour before I finally got the courage to creep out. The apartment was silent. I slowly made my way to the living room. My eyes were glued to the balcony door. With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked the cord for the blinds. There was nothing there. Just the rain, the empty balcony, the city lights winking in the distance. I felt a bizarre mix of relief and utter dread. Relief that I was alone, and dread because I had no explanation for what had happened. The next morning, I was a wreck. I decided I had to know. I had to talk to Mrs. Gable. I knocked on her door, my stomach in knots. No answer. I knocked again louder. Still nothing. I went to the building manager and told him I was worried about my elderly neighbor, that I hadn't seen her in a while. He had a master key. He opened her door, and we went inside. The apartment was pristine tidy. Nothing seemed out of place. But when we got to her living room, we stopped dead. The sliding glass door to her balcony was wide open. The cold, rainy air filled the room. On the concrete floor of the balcony, there were long, deep scratches in the concrete, radiating from the corner where it met my own. And in that corner, propped against the railing, was a single, muddy climbing rope, coiled neatly, as if waiting to be used again. Mrs. Gable was gone. They never found her. I moved out the next day. I broke my lease and lost my security deposit, and I didn't care. I live in a house now in the suburbs with no balcony. But sometimes, on rainy nights, when I'm about to fall asleep, I hear it. A soft, gentle thump against my bedroom window, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that he found me. Being a long-haul trucker means you get comfortable with being alone. You have to. For 10, 12 hours a day, it's just you, the road, and the low rumble of the engine. Your cab is your home, your office, your castle. It's small, but it's safe. At least, that's what I used to think. This happened about 5 years ago, on a cross-country run from California to Maine. I was hauling a load of produce, and I was making good time. I was somewhere in the vast, empty gut of Nebraska. It was about 2 a.m., and the highway was a black ribbon unwinding into nothing. The only other lights were the stars, which out there, away from any city, looked like someone spilled a bucket of diamonds on black velvet. It's beautiful, but it's an intimidating kind of beauty. The emptiness of it all can get inside your head if you let it. I was getting heavy-lidded, so I decided to pull over for a few hours. I saw a sign for a rest stop, one of the small, no-frills ones. Just a parking lot, a sad little brick building with restrooms, and a couple of vending machines. When I pulled in, the place was completely deserted. Not another truck, not a single car. It was perfect. I hate crowded lots, they're noisy. And you always get some guy idling his reefer unit all night long. I backed into a spot at the far end of the lot, away from the main building, under the weak orange glow of a single security light. It cast long, spooky shadows. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. I did my usual routine, checked the locks on my doors, pulled the curtains shut over the windshield and side windows, and climbed into the sleeper berth. The cab was pitch black. I was out like a light in minutes. I don't know what woke me up. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a change in the air. I lay there in the dark, my eyes wide open, listening. The only thing I could hear was the faint whisper of the wind outside. I told myself I was just jumpy, that the silence was getting to me. I was about to roll over and go back to sleep when I felt it. A gentle rock. My truck is a 60,000-pound machine. The wind can't move it like that. Not a gentle breeze anyway. It happened again. A slow, deliberate push on the side of the trailer, followed by a soft release. The whole rig swayed, just slightly. It felt like a giant hand was testing its weight. My heart started kicking against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stayed perfectly still, straining my ears. Who the hell was out there? And why were they pushing on my truck? It made no sense. It wasn't like someone trying to break in. It was playful, curious. And that was so much worse. I slowly, carefully, slid out of the bunk and crept to the front of the cab. My hand was shaking as I reached for the edge of the curtain over the passenger side window. I pulled it back just a fraction of an inch, enough to create a tiny peephole. The parking lot was still empty. The orange light hummed. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I saw him. He was standing near the front of my truck, just out of the direct light, in the deep shadow thrown by the cab. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see his posture. He was perfectly still, staring at my truck. No, not at the truck. He was staring right at the passenger window, right where I was looking out. It was like he knew I was there, like he was waiting for me. I let the curtain fall, my breath catching in my throat. My mind was screaming, "Call 911, start the truck, honk the horn." But I was paralyzed by a very specific, very cold fear. The man hadn't done anything illegal. He was just standing there. If I called the cops, he could just walk away. They'd get there in 20 minutes, find nothing, and I'd be the crazy trucker who saw shadows in the dark. I decided my best bet was to just stay quiet. Don't let him know I'm awake. He'll get bored and leave. So I waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every creak of the truck, every gust of wind, was him. I didn't dare look out again. Then I heard a new sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the driver's side door. A light, rhythmic tapping with a fingernail. It was methodical, calm. Tap, tap, tap. He'd walked around the rig while I was sitting there, frozen. My blood ran cold. This was a test. He was checking to see if I was in here, if I was awake. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't hear me. The tapping continued for a full minute, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken threat. Then I heard the soft hiss of the air brake release. My stomach dropped into my shoes. That's not a sound you can make from the outside without a specific tool. It meant he was under my truck. He was at the glad hand connectors, tampering with my brake lines. This wasn't just a random weirdo anymore. This was something else. This was calculated. I didn't have a choice. I wasn't going to be a sitting duck. I lunged for the driver's seat, my heart a drum solo in my chest. My plan was to start the engine and lay on the horn. The sound would be deafening. It would hopefully scare him off and alert anyone, even miles away, that something was wrong. I turned the key. The engine roared to life and the dashboard lit up. I slammed my hand on the center of the steering wheel. The horn blared, a deep, angry sound that shattered the night. I expected him to run, but he didn't. As the horn wailed, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I risked a glance at my passenger side mirror. What I saw is burned into my memory. He was crawling out from under my trailer, and he was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched his face in the dim orange light. He wasn't scared. He was enjoying this. He got to his feet, still smiling that awful smile, and he just stood there watching me. Then he raised a hand and gave me a slow, deliberate wave before turning and calmly walking off into the darkness at the edge of the lot. I kept the horn blaring for a solid 5 minutes. I didn't move from that spot until the sun started to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. When it was fully light, I got out, a tire iron in my hand, and checked the brake lines. They were disconnected. If I had tried to drive away in a panic, I would have had no stopping power. I could have rolled right out onto the highway and into a catastrophic wreck. I never saw him again. I reported it to the police, but there was no evidence he was ever there, other than the disconnected lines. They took my statement, but I could tell I'd just gotten into a dispute with another trucker. They didn't understand the feeling of it, the predatory calm, the smile. I still drive, but I never sleep at deserted rest stops anymore. I pay the extra money for a spot at a busy, well-lit truck stop, surrounded by other drivers. But even then, sometimes when I'm lying in my bunk in the dark, I feel it. A gentle rock, a slow, deliberate push. I know it's just the wind, or another truck pulling in beside me. But I'm never really sure. And I always check my brake lines before I roll out. My job isn't glamorous. I'm a watchman at a limestone quarry. Sounds like something out of an old movie, right? but it's a real job. 12-hour shifts from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I sit in a little guard shack at the entrance to a massive hole in the ground and make sure no kids come in to party, and nobody tries to steal a 50-ton piece of machinery. 99% of the time, it's the most boring job in the world. It's just me, a paperback novel, and the sound of the wind whistling over acres of carved-out rock. It's that other 1% that makes you question if the pay is worth it. The quarry is in a rural area, about 5 miles from the nearest town. The entrance is a long gravel road off the main highway. At the end of it is my shack, and beyond that, a heavy-duty chain-link gate that leads down into the quarry itself. The shack is basically a glorified shed. A desk, a chair, a small electric heater, and windows on all 4 sides. It's my little fishbowl. This particular night was in the dead of winter. A thick blanket of snow covered everything, which made the landscape look alien and strangely beautiful under the full moon. The snow also meant that any sound carried for miles, and any tracks would be perfectly preserved. It was about 3 a.m. I was midway through a terrible spy novel when I heard a car. That was the first weird thing. I rarely see headlights out here after midnight. I looked up and saw a pair of them coming down the gravel road, slow and steady. They didn't pull up to the shack. Instead, they stopped about 100 yards away, right where the gravel road met the pavement of the highway. Then they turned off their lights. My guard dog senses kicked in. This wasn't normal. Teenagers looking for a place to park would usually just pull right up. This felt different, calculated. I stood up and watched through my binoculars. The snow was so bright under the moonlight that I could just make out the shape of the car. It was an older model sedan, dark-colored. It just sat there. Not a sound. No one got out. It was just waiting. I'm not a cop. My job is to observe and report. So I picked up the phone and called my supervisor, a guy named Dave who was probably fast asleep. "Dave," I said, keeping my voice low. "Got a car sitting at the turn off. Been here 5 minutes, lights out. Probably kids." He grumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Just keep an eye on it. Call the sheriff if they try to come on the property. Don't engage. Standard procedure." I hung up and kept watching. 10 minutes went by. 20. The car didn't move. It was like a statue. The anxiety started to build in my chest. It's one thing when someone is actively trying to do something. It's another when they're just sitting there in the dark, making you wonder what they're thinking, what they're planning. The unknown is always scarier. Then, a single door opened. A figure got out of the passenger side. They were tall, silhouetted against the snow. They didn't walk toward me. They started walking along the edge of the quarry property line, just inside the tree line that separated it from the surrounding forest. They were moving parallel to the main gate, but staying in the shadows of the trees. My heart started to pound. This was a deliberate flanking maneuver. I grabbed the binoculars again. The figure was moving slowly, methodically, their feet crunching softly in the snow. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape against the white. I picked up the phone to call the sheriff. As I was dialing, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A loud sealange. It came from my left, from the direction of the massive Caterpillar earth movers that were parked about 50 yards away, inside the gate. My head snapped in that direction. There was someone else. The person from the car was a diversion. I dropped the phone and killed the single light inside my shack, plunging myself into darkness. My eyes adjusted. I scanned the area around the machinery. I saw him. A second figure, already inside the fence. He was crouched low beside the giant tire of a front-end loader. How did he get in? The gate was locked. The fence is 10 feet high and topped with barbed wire. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest, as he scurried from one piece of equipment to the next, getting closer and closer to the massive pit, the quarry itself. He wasn't trying to steal anything. He was just moving deeper into the property. Then the first figure, the one from the car, emerged from the woods. He walked right up to the main gate. He didn't try to climb it or cut it. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, and stared directly at my shack. He knew I was in there. He wanted me to see him. He wanted me to be focused on him. I was trapped. I had one man at the gate staring me down, and another who had somehow breached the perimeter, and was now God knows where in the quarry. My little shack suddenly felt less like a fishbowl and more like a baited trap. I finally got through to the sheriff's department. I explained the situation, my voice a panicked whisper. They said they were dispatching a car, but they were 25 minutes out. 25 minutes felt like a lifetime. The man at the gate didn't move. He just stood there, a silent sentinel of dread. I couldn't see the second man anymore. He'd vanished into the deep shadows of the quarry's terraced levels. What was he doing down there? The silence was terrifying. The only sound was the hum of the ballast in my now extinguished light fixture. Suddenly, all the floodlights that illuminate the main pit flickered on. The entire quarry was bathed in a harsh, brilliant white light. It was blinding. The man at the gate didn't even flinch. And then I saw him. The second man. He was standing on the lowest level of the quarry, a tiny figure in a vast, man-made canyon. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there. But he wasn't alone. He was standing over a large, dark bundle on the ground. My stomach churned. From my vantage point, it looked like a rolled-up carpet, or a body bag. The two men were perfectly synchronized. The one in the pit bent down and started to unroll the bundle. The man at the gate took one hand out of his pocket and raised it, pointing. Not at me. Not at the quarry. He was pointing up, at the sky. I looked up. There was nothing there but the moon and stars. I didn't understand. I looked back down. The man in the pit had finished. Laid out on the cold stone floor, illuminated by the floodlights, was something long and dark, and he was now walking away from it, back towards the shadows at the edge of the pit. The man at the gate put his hand back in his pocket. He turned, walked back to the waiting car. The passenger door opened, he got in, and the car started. No headlights. It just backed onto the highway and drove away into the night. A minute later, the floodlights in the quarry switched off, plunging the world back into moonlight and shadow. When the sheriff's deputies finally arrived, I told them everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic mess. They went down into the pit with flashlights. I waited in my shack, shaking uncontrollably. They came back up an hour later, their faces grim. They told me I was lucky I stayed in the shack. They told me not to talk about what I saw. What I thought was a bundle, what I thought was a body wasn't. It was a message. Spread out on the quarry floor, arranged with chilling precision, were 3 dead deer. They had been gutted. Their entrails used to spell out a single, massive word on the stone. A name. The name of the county's district attorney. I quit that job the next day. I never found out what the message was for, who those men were, or what happened to the DA. I don't want to know. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place at night, I can still see that man at the gate, standing silently in the snow, and I feel that same cold dread, the feeling of being a small, helpless part of a story that is much bigger and more terrifying than I could ever understand. I wasn't the target. I was just the audience, and I think that's what scares me the most. I was a sophomore in college, living in a dorm that was probably older than my grandparents'. It was one of those classic brick buildings with drafty windows and floors that creaked with history. My room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a small patch of woods that separated the campus from the town. I loved that view. It was peaceful. My roommate, Kevin, was gone for the weekend, visiting his family, so I had the place to myself. I was planning a weekend of doing absolutely nothing, binge watching a show, eating junk food, and not thinking about my midterm papers. It was a rainy Friday night. The sound of the rain against the window was cozy, a perfect backdrop for my lazy plans. I was curled up in my bed around 11 p.m., laptop propped on my knees, deep into some sci-fi series. That's when I first heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap. I paused my show and listened. It was coming from the window. I figured it was just a branch from one of the trees in the woods, blown by the wind. The windows were old, single-pane things. Sound traveled right through them. I ignored it and hit play. A few minutes later, it happened again. Tap, 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 tap. It was more insistent this time, more rhythmic. It didn't sound like a branch anymore. A branch is random, chaotic. This was deliberate. I muted the show. A little knot of unease started to form in my stomach. I sat up and stared at the window. The blinds were down, so I couldn't see anything. The tapping stopped. I told myself I was being stupid. It's an old building. It makes noises. I was alone, so my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to get back into my show, but I couldn't focus. I kept listening, waiting. The silence was tense. After about 10 minutes with no more sounds, I started to relax. I convinced myself it really was just a branch, and the pattern was a coincidence. Then, the tapping started again. But this time it wasn't on the glass. It was on the wall right next to the window. A hard, sharp Kano's key, right on the brick exterior of the building. My heart jumped into my throat. That was not a branch, that was a fist. But my room was on the 3rd floor. There's no balcony, no fire escape, just a sheer brick wall going straight down to the ground. I scrambled off my bed, my mind racing. Who could be out there? How could they be out there? It was impossible. My first thought was a prank. Maybe someone from the floor above had lowered a friend down on a rope. It seemed insane, but it was college. Insane pranks happened. I crept over to the window, my body trembling. I didn't want to look. I was terrified of what I might see. But I had to know. My hand shook as I reached for the cord to the blinds. I took a deep breath and pulled. The blinds shot up with a loud clatter, and there was nothing there. Just the dark, wet glass with rain streaming down it. Beyond it, the dark, swaying shapes of the trees. No person, no rope, nothing. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I must have imagined it. The acoustics of the old building, the wind, my own paranoia. It all combined to create a phantom knocker. I let out a shaky laugh. I felt like an idiot. I was about to turn away from the window when my eyes caught something. On the outside of the glass, in the middle of all the raindrops, was a perfect handprint. It was faint, but it was definitely there. A large, greasy palm print, right in the center of the pane, as if someone had pressed their hand flat against the glass to steady themselves. I stared at that handprint, and the laughter died in my throat. The fear came back, colder and sharper than before. It was real. Someone had been out there. I backed away from the window slowly. I didn't call campus security. What would I say? I found a handprint on my 3rd floor window. They'd log it and do nothing. I was alone in this. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, with the lights on and my desk chair wedged under the doorknob of the room's main door. I didn't sleep. Every gust of wind, every creak of the building, sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I just kept picturing that handprint. The next morning, in the safety of daylight, I felt braver. The handprint was still there. I took a picture of it with my phone as proof that I wasn't crazy. I decided to investigate. The prank theory was the only one that made any sense, however unlikely. I went outside. The ground below my window was soft mud and wet leaves. There were no ladder marks, no footprints, nothing. I looked up at my window from the ground. It looked so high, so impossibly out of reach. There were no footholds on the brick wall, no ledges, no drain pipes strong enough to hold a person's weight. I spent the rest of the day on edge. I couldn't relax. I even went to the library, just to be around other people. When I got back to my dorm that evening, I dreaded walking into my room. As I unlocked my door, I noticed something on the floor. A piece of paper had been slipped underneath. My stomach twisted. I picked it up. It was a page torn from a notebook. Scrawled on it in messy, block letters were 4 words. NICVWFROM UPHER. That was it. The terror I felt was absolute. This wasn't a prank. A prankster wants an audience, they want to see you scream. This was something else. This was predatory. Whoever this was, they had been outside my window, close enough to leave a handprint, and they had come back to leave me a note. They had been in my building, in my hallway, right outside my door. I didn't stay another night. I packed a bag, called my parents, and told them I was coming home. I made up some excuse about feeling sick. When Kevin got back, I told him the whole story. He helped me request a room change. We showed the RA the note and the picture of the handprint. They took it seriously then. They moved me to a different dorm on the other side of campus, on the ground floor, which I thought would make me feel safer. It didn't. For the rest of my time at that college, I never felt safe. I sealed my window shut with duct tape. I bought blackout curtains, because the note proved the most terrifying part of all. The person wasn't just outside. They were watching me. They had seen me pull up the blinds. They had seen my face, seen the fear in my eyes. And the thing that still haunts me, the question I can never answer, is how? How did they get up there? I've come to accept that I'll never know. And that's the part that keeps me awake at night. The knowledge that there are people out there who don't follow the rules of logic, who can appear on the other side of a third-story window on a rainy night, just to let you know that nowhere is truly safe. My wife Anna and I bought our first home in a sprawling, newish suburb in central Texas. The kind of place where all the houses look vaguely the same, and the lawns are all impeccably manicured. Our house was at the very edge of the development, which we loved. Our backyard, instead of backing up to another identical house, ended at a simple wooden fence. And beyond that fence was nothing. Just a wide, flat expanse of undeveloped Texas scrubland that stretched for miles. It was our little piece of wilderness. We have a dog, a goofy golden retriever named Buster. Every night around 10, it was my ritual to let him out into the backyard one last time before bed. I'd slide open the glass door from the living room. He'd trot out, do his business, and I'd call him back in. It was a routine as regular as breathing. One night in early summer, a few months after we moved in, I let Buster out as usual. It was a hot, still night, the air thick and humming with the sound of cicadas. I stood at the open door, watching him snuffle around near the back fence. Suddenly, he froze. His head shot up, and he stared out into the darkness beyond the fence. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I said, stepping out onto the patio. Buster didn't move. He just kept staring, his body tense. I followed his gaze. The scrubland was a sea of blackness. The moon was just a sliver, so there wasn't much light. I couldn't see anything. I figured it was just a coyote or a rabbit. "Come in, bud, let's go in," I called. He ignored me, letting out a short, sharp bark. That's when I saw him. A man. He was walking along the other side of our fence. He was about 50 yards out, just a tall, thin silhouette moving slowly from left to right. He walked with a strange, deliberate gait, his arms held stiffly at his sides. He wasn't on a path. He was just walking through the rough, uneven terrain as if it were a paved sidewalk. A chill went down my spine despite the heat. Who would be walking out there, in the middle of nowhere, at this time of night? I called for Buster again, more forcefully this time. "Buster, inside now?" He finally broke his stare and trotted back to me, whining nervously. I ushered him inside and slid the glass door shut, locking it. I stood there, my heart beating a little faster than it should, and watched the man. He continued his slow, steady walk until he disappeared into the darkness on the far side of my property line. I told Anna about it. She was as creeped out as I was. "Maybe he's from one of the farms further out," she suggested. But there were no farms for miles in that direction. We brushed it off as a one-time weird event, but it wasn't. The next night it happened again. Same time, same man. Same slow, methodical walk from left to right along the outside of our fence. Buster went ballistic this time, barking and scratching at the glass door. I just stood there and watched, a feeling of deep unease settling over me. He never looked at the house. He just walked his predetermined path and vanished. This went on for 4 straight nights. Every night at 10, the man would appear. He became our private, terrifying ghost. We started calling him the fence walker. We called the non-emergency police line. They sent a car out, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. They swept the area with their searchlights and found nothing. No tracks, no camp, nothing. The officer was polite, but I could tell he thought we were a pair of jumpy city folk, spooked by the country. On the 5th night, I decided I was going to do something. I was going to confront him. Not physically, but I was going to make it clear he was being watched. When I saw him appear at the edge of the yard, I flipped on the big backyard floodlights. The entire yard and a good 20 feet of the scrubland beyond the fence were instantly illuminated. And there he was. I got my first clear look at him. He was older than I thought, maybe in his 60s. He was wearing simple, dark work clothes and a baseball cap pulled down low, shadowing his face. He didn't react to the light. He didn't flinch, he didn't stop, he didn't speed up. He just kept walking his path, as if my floodlights and my barking dog didn't exist. It was the most unnerving thing I've ever seen. It was like I was invisible to him. He continued his walk until he passed out of the range of the light and disappeared. The next night, he didn't come, nor the night after. A week went by, and we started to think, maybe, just maybe, the floodlights had worked. We had scared him off. We started to relax. The backyard began to feel like ours again. About 2 weeks later, I had to travel for work. It was just for 2 nights. Anna was nervous about being alone, so I had my brother come and stay with her. I called her that first night from my hotel room. "Did the fence walker show up?" I asked, half joking. Her voice was quiet, strained. "No," she said. "He didn't walk the fence." There was a pause. "Ani, he was in the backyard tonight." The blood drained from my face. What are you talking about?" "When I let Buster out," she said, her voice trembling. "It was just standing there, by the oak tree, inside the fence. He was just standing there, watching the house." "Where's my brother?" "Did you call the police?" I was frantic. "He's here." He ran out screaming, and the man he just turned around, walked to the fence, climbed over it with this weird, slow grace, and disappeared into the dark. "The police are on their way." He had never been aggressive. He had never threatened us. But he had crossed a line. Literally. He had breached our sanctuary. He wasn't just walking past anymore. He was claiming the space as his own. The police came. They found scuff marks on the fence where he'd climbed it, but nothing else. I flew home the next day. We put up security cameras, more lights, a new lock on the gate. We never saw the fence walker again. But the peace was broken forever. We never knew who he was or what he wanted. Was he mentally ill? Was he a predator casing our house? We'll never have answers. We sold the house a year later. We live in the city now, in an apartment building, high off the ground. But I still think about him. I think about that slow, relentless walk. He wasn't trying to scare us, not in the way a burglar does. It was more profound than that. He was teaching us a lesson about fences. We thought our fence was there to keep things out. But for him, it was just a line on a map, a suggestion. And he was showing us, night after night, that he could cross it whenever he wanted. The terror wasn't that he was outside. The terror was that the line between outside and inside was meaningless to him. I'm a geologist. I spend most of my time in places most people try to avoid. Remote deserts, dense forests, desolate mountain ranges. I'm used to being alone. I like it. The silence of the wilderness is a language I understand. But there's a difference between being alone and being watched. I learned that difference in the high desert of northern Arizona. I was on a 2-week solo field expedition, mapping a series of unusual rock formations in a part of the state that's basically off the grid. My camp was just my truck, a beat-up but reliable Ford F-150, and a small one-man tent I'd pitch next to it each night. I was miles from the nearest paved road, and I hadn't seen another human being in 4 days. It was bliss. The landscape out there is stark and beautiful. Red rock, twisted juniper trees, and a sky so big it makes you feel like an ant. The days were hot and the nights were cold and diamond clear. My routine was simple: wake up with the sun, hike and work all day, then eat a can of chili by my campfire and stare at the stars until I fell asleep. On the 5th night, I was sitting by my fire writing up my field notes. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the sagebrush. It was completely peaceful. That's when I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was the distinct clink of rock on rock. But it wasn't the sound of a natural rock slide. It was a single sharp clink, and it came from the darkness just beyond the ring of my firelight. I froze, listening. I'm not easily spooked. It was probably just an animal, a deer or a bighorn sheep, dislodging a stone. I scanned the darkness but saw nothing. I waited. A few minutes later it came again. Clink. From the same spot. I grabbed my high-powered flashlight and aimed the beam in the direction of the sound. The light cut a bright white tunnel through the night. It illuminated a small ridge of sandstone about 30 yards from my camp. Nothing there, just rock and shadow. But as I swept the beam back and forth, it caught something. A flicker of movement. I snapped the light back to the spot. It was a person. They were crouched behind a juniper tree, trying to press themselves into the shadows. All I could see was a pair of legs in dark pants and a piece of a torso. The second my light hit them, they ducked completely out of sight. My heart hammered against my ribs. My blissful solitude was shattered. I wasn't alone, and whoever was out there was hiding from me. "Hello," I yelled, my voice sounding shaky and thin. "Who's out there? I can see you." No answer, just the sound of the wind. This was bad. I was miles from help. I had no cell service. The only thing connecting me to civilization was my truck. I stood up slowly, keeping the flashlight beam pointed at the tree where I'd seen the person. I backed up toward my truck, my other hand reaching for the heavy maglite I kept on the front seat. As I backed away from the fire, its light diminished, and the darkness felt like it was pressing in on me. I got to my truck, opened the door, and grabbed the big flashlight. I now had a light in one hand and a potential club in the other. I didn't take my eyes off that tree. I stood there for what felt like an hour, in a silent standoff with someone I couldn't see. The rational part of my brain was telling me it could be a lost hiker, someone who was scared and didn't know if I was friendly. But the primal part of my brain was screaming that this was a threat. The way they hid, the silence, it felt predatory. Finally, I decided I couldn't just stand here all night. I had to get into the truck, lock the doors, and wait for morning. I kept the main flashlight beam on the tree while I quickly opened my driver's side door and slid in, pulling the door shut behind me. The thunk of the lock engaging was the most reassuring sound I'd ever heard. I sat there in the dark cab, my windows rolled up, and just watched. The fire slowly died down, turning from a cheerful blaze to a bed of glowing red embers. The darkness became almost total. I couldn't see the tree anymore. I had no idea if the person was still there, or if they had crept closer under the cover of darkness. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat there, jumping at every little sound, my eyes straining to see any movement in the blackness outside. When the first hint of gray light appeared on the eastern horizon, it was like being reborn. As soon as it was light enough to see, I looked toward the ridge. There was no one there. I scanned the entire area with my binoculars. Nothing. It was like they had vanished. I was exhausted, but my adrenaline was still pumping. I had to know what was going on. Against my better judgment, I got out of the truck. I had to pack up my tent and gear anyway. As I walked over to my campsite, I noticed something that made my stomach clench with fear. In the soft dirt right next to where my tent had been, someone had drawn a message. They had used their finger to trace letters in the soil. The writing was neat, almost careful. It was a single sentence. "Yuer stadiengomyfio." I stared at those words, my mind reeling. What did it mean? Was it a threat? A warning? Was I camped on some kind of unmarked grave? My geologist's mind immediately dismissed it as impossible. This area was solid rock just a few feet down. It wasn't a burial site, but the person who wrote it believed it, and they had been watching me sleep right next to it all night. Then I looked around my campsite more carefully. The clinking sound I'd heard, it wasn't just random. All around my camp, just at the edge of the firelight, were small piles of stones, little cairns, 4 of them, marking out a perfect rectangle around my tent and my fire. The person hadn't been hiding. They had been working. They had been marking a boundary I had crossed. I didn't need any more convincing. I threw my gear into the back of my truck with frantic speed. I didn't bother making coffee. I just needed to leave. As I was about to get in the truck, I took one last look around, and I saw him. He was standing on the sandstone ridge, the same place he'd been the night before. He was just standing there in the morning light watching me. He was a wary old man with a long, gray beard, dressed in ragged clothes. He wasn't holding a weapon. He just stood there, his expression unreadable from that distance. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just watched me go. I drove for 2 hours straight without looking back. I never filed a report. What would I say? That an old man wrote a weird message in the dirt. They would have thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and I can't shake the feeling of it. I think about that man, alone in the desert, guarding that piece of empty land. I think about his quiet, methodical work in the dark. He wasn't trying to harm me. He was just delivering a message. He was telling me I was trespassing on his sacred ground. The terror didn't come from a threat of violence. It came from the chilling realization that I had stumbled into someone else's story, someone else's reality, and that in their world, I was the monster. I was the one who was side, camped on a spot that meant everything to him. And I know, with absolute certainty, that he is still out there, under that big sky, keeping his silent, lonely vigil.